All right, cool. Well, I'm Joshua Jung, and I first of all want to start by thanking both Deb and Steve for hosting tonight. This is pretty wild. I've been waiting a long time to have an opportunity to share it my story to a little more than a few people here and there. I've probably told this story 100 times now in the last 4 years to different people and with different effects on each person, and it's been pretty wild to see the positive response from a lot of people, especially people who are not Christians, to this story in particular. And as we go through it, I think you're going to see why, because it's pretty wild. So I'll give a small warning. There's some really strange stuff that happened in my story. Like, there's some really unconventional things that would make most people who may have attended church in their life a little bit, like, ask a lot of questions. So
Queasy.
Some of them queasy, yeah. To give a small caveat, there's actually some people in my family that have pretty much rejected a large chunk of this and aren't sure what to do with it. So I will be open for all sorts of questions. If at any point during it you're like, hey, I have a question about this is like really strange, just raise your hands and I will be more than glad to talk about it. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, everything that happens in this is 100% true. This is 100% what happens. And so let's get started. First of all, does anybody know where that reference comes from? There and back again.
The Hobbit.
Yes, there we go. Who said that? Good work. Good work. Yeah. So this is an allusion to the what?
Nothing. First I was thinking C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I went to C.S. Lewis first.
Yeah. Close. All right, let's make sure this actually works. Does this work? There we go. Great. So I grew up here in Wichita, Kansas. That's our house as of a couple years ago. Actually, somebody else lives in it now, but on Perry Street in Riverside. So we weren't too far from Crum Castle. So we used to do walks, to Crum Castle and back and show it off to everybody. And that's my family on the left there. So I'm with the crazy wave in my hair. I had more hair back then. And that's 3 of my siblings. There's actually 4 now. So my 4th sibling, Sarah, is not in the picture. So it's me, my brother Ben, Jonathan, Rochelle, and then Sarah would be the 5th kid. So grew up there. I had what I thought was the kind of a Leave It to Beaver sort of childhood, where it's like you grew up with all the kids in the neighborhood getting together and having lots of games to capture the flag and stuff. We would get all the kids in the neighborhood and have like 25 or 30 kids get together for that. So in my mind, I thought my childhood was like this sort of picture perfect, the way everybody should be sort of thing, right? Around 1997, so I was born in 85, so I would have been around 12 years old. My dad, along with other people, including Steve, started Redeemer Bible Church. And at that point in time, I was told a story as to why this was happening from my parents, why they were leaving their current church. And the general vibe that I got out of this was we wanted to be more serious Christians. And so I was raised very strict conservative Protestant Christian. And so I thought this was an amazing thing. I just thought, oh, we're doing the right thing, Yeah, Wichita has 400 churches, but we're going to do it right this time. That summer I was baptized. I believe it was that summer. And I'd given my life completely to the Lord. And I'd had this pretty wild dream, which I'm not going to tell now, but there was a pretty wild dream that involved the gospel when I was really young. And at the end, if somebody wants to hear that and we have time, I can explain that. But I was fully committed to Christianity at this point in time. And not too long after this, things got weird. Things started to get a little strange. So this is actually, that girl there is my dad's cousin. She would have been 18 years old in 1997, and she was murdered in a cemetery. There was potential connection to witchcraft or satanic ritual stuff that was going on. And this would have been around the same weekend that Anton LaVey, the head of the Satanic Church, died. And I just found this out. I did not know this until a couple months ago. So the connection, I was like, what is going on? Because when I tell you this next part, you're going to be like, oh. When we went to the funeral, there was this massive pressure. You could feel this spiritual pressure at the funeral because Anastasia's friends were all at that time heavily involved in something, although they wouldn't say what, because they were all dressed in very satanic garb at the funeral. And there was one man in particular who I remember being young and thinking something's really off with him. Like, he had a lot of women following him around. They were kind of laughing at the funeral. They had gone up and seen her body in the casket. It was just really dark. And I'm sitting in the pew, not farther than from here to you. And this man, I'm sitting back, and I'm like 12 years old, and this guy comes in. He goes to sit down. And in my head, I thought, that man is very evil. And as soon as I thought it, he turned around and looked straight at me. And he stared straight at me and goes, and I was like, was there somebody behind? No, there was nobody behind me. And I look back at him, and he looks at me again and goes, what? As soon as I turned around. Well, at that point in time, I'd just been a Christian for a short period of time. Like, I'd just been baptized, right? I just assumed other Christians must be going through stuff like this all the time. Like, I didn't, but I was weirded out by it. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was there seemed to be a connection. Something in him understood what was going on in my thoughts and was trying to do something. Okay, there's a mystery here that I still haven't solved. If somebody can help me at the end, this would be great. This date is incredibly important, as you will see a little later in this presentation. Because at that moment, I have suspicions that something happens demonically, which will become clear later. But this was actually a pretty crazy story. As you can see here, there's actually an episode from 2020 about that particular murder. So this was actually a pretty high-profile murder that had occurred. There was a bunch of investigations on it. There have been lots of different stories about this. So it was a pretty big deal.
And she was your cousin or your dad's cousin?
My dad's cousin, yeah. But she would have been 6 years older than me. So, yep. So that weekend was incredibly strange. And I had not connected together until recently that some other stuff that started to happen around this time might have been connected to this. When we're done, we can discuss how this relates to everybody's lives now, but this was a fascinating moment. Okay, so now we have this countdown from this Halloween in 1997. I didn't realize something had happened, right? And I started to go through this really, really dark period. All of my joy was being stripped from me. I had a very abusive moment from my dad shortly after this where he deeply beat me up because I didn't want to go to church. And then nobody found out in church. And I thought it didn't affect me. Well, it really did affect me. And I had a nightmare about it several months ago and was like, I need to address this. So my dad was putting on this presentation of, being the good church elder, having his business here in Wichita and all this stuff while simultaneously doing this. I've talked to him about this since, and he says he doesn't remember it, which is rather interesting if you think about demonic stuff going on. I had a dream, and this was before Stranger Things. That's 11 from Stranger Things there. That's not me. And I had this dream one night, extremely dark. I was very depressed and was having suicidal thoughts in my teens. I had gone to my parents to talk about this. They were always like, oh, this is just normal stuff in your teens. Everybody goes through this stuff. I'm like, I don't think some of this is just normal teen stuff. I was having demonic beings come in my room, and I could feel their presence. So I would all my hair would stand on end. I was completely awake because I could move. This wasn't sleep paralysis. I could actually move. One time I actually got up out of bed and went and grabbed my dad and brought him down. And I was like, can't you feel that? There's something in here. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on. Either I'm losing my mind or something. During this period, I had this dream. I was super depressed, and this one night, it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything, and I was completely alone. There was not a single person in the entire world knew about me, cared about me. And out of the darkness, this dog, this wolf with a head about this big, lunges straight at me out of the fog, just right at my face. And I'm freaked out. Only happened a couple seconds, and it gets right in front of my nose, and I hear a clink. And this clink that I hear, I look down, and there's a chain going off of his neck. And then I woke up, and this little voice says, Josh, it doesn't matter how far the devil goes, he'll always be on a chain. And that was it. There was no answer to what was going on. There was no answer as to why I was going through this depressed period. There was no answer as to what this dark being was that was entering my room or why. I was just in this fog, and all I had was this little hint from someone that this was actually important in some respect. So this darkness continued with just this little blip of hope. And I was like, all right, well, I've gone to pastors and stuff and been talking about some of the doubts I'd had and questions and this confusion about what's going on and everything. And in a lot of cases, they just sort of looked at me like, well, do you read your Bible? You know, do you have any hidden sins in your life? You know, is there like something like the normal, like it was like some sort of chat GPT thing, you know, it was like, oh, you just predict what the next questions would be. And I'd be like, and they'd be like, well, everything should be fine. I don't know what your problem is, basically was the response I was getting. So I was like, fine, I'm just going to pretend like everything's okay. And so that's what I did. You know, my dad owned Continental Cyclery, the bicycle shop. I went to Kansas Bible Camp many times up near Hutchinson. And we were going to Cornerstone Church. It was originally Beth Eden Church over there on Amadon. But it ended up getting changed to Cornerstone Church. This was around the time, for those of the Freisens will know about the infamous Pastor Joe. That was around that same time that he started to get involved at the church and began some pretty abusive patterns of behavior, which he eventually even admitted he was doing. And so this was an incredibly dark period, but on the surface there was this part of me that was like trying to hold it together, like everything's actually fine. I ended up going to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I'd done some computer stuff, but I thought God wanted me to go into some form of ministry. I went twice for like 2 semesters, separate semesters. One was online, I think, and then the other was in person. It's been a while. I don't like getting old. So the, but, yeah. I'm going to Moody Bible Institute, and I'm thinking, you know who I don't understand? I don't understand those atheists. Well, I mean, you obviously think somebody who's having spiritual experiences and dreams and stuff like that. It's like, why in the world would anybody not believe any of this is real? And so I decided, I felt God wanted me to be able to minister to people who don't believe. And I had this thought process, which looking back is kind of insane. My thinking was, okay, the golden rule says you're supposed to do unto others as you want them to do unto you. I want people to read the Bible and study Christianity, so I should be able to be willing to read their books and study atheism. So that's what I did. I was like, fine, I'm going to do this. So I did. Interestingly, at that point in time, you know, I even read the Satanic Bible that Anton LaVey. Actually, I had no idea that Anton LaVey was involved in that other incident, by the way. This is just clicking right now. I even read that Anton LaVey's book at that point in time. And this dark presence, I will tell one small story. When I arrived in Chicago, I could feel that the dark presence, whatever this was much stronger than what I felt in Wichita. And there was one moment in my dorm room where I remember, I can feel it happening again. I can feel somebody coming into the room. And this time I felt it come in, and I felt it go. I could tell it knew, I knew it was there, and it instantly disappeared. And I thought, wait, that's kind of weird. Why, like when I'm in Wichita, it didn't seem to care, and now, is this a different being? Like, what's going on? It seemed to want to, it didn't want to make its presence known to me, which was really, really strange. So I'm studying atheism around that time. That was when the 4 horsemen of atheism. So you got Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. And then down there on the lower right is Bart Ehrman. Now Bart Ehrman, you may have heard that name before. He actually went to Moody Bible Institute and then became an agnostic because he had studied the text so much that he kind of reached a point where he's like, I don't think I can trust any of this, right? Well, I was studying everything they were saying because they were doing all these debates at that point in time, right? Like they were having all these debates on YouTube and everything. They were going around the country and talking to people. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be a Christian apologist and combat this stuff, I need to be able to have good arguments, understand all the data. And as I studied the data, I started to get really worried. And so you'll hear stories about people going to schools, and the further they get into the education, the more liberal they get. Yeah. That was exactly what was happening. Now, there's some catches to this that we can discuss after. In large part, a lot of the stuff they were saying was actually true. The foundation was false, but a lot of the stuff that they were bringing up, they were just kind of bringing up stuff that almost everybody has been learning about Christianity if they go to school in the last 200 years, but they were presenting it to the common person. And this was creating a lot of trouble because normally when you go to Christian schools, what they'll do is they try to slowly introduce they'll be like, well, we'll wait until you're in your master's program before we show that to you because it's a little bit too much for you to handle right now. Well, I was my first year at Moody, and I'm like diving into this stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is all a mess. I also had this emotional influence of having been raised in an environment where I didn't actually, I saw a lot of power getting to people's heads in the church. And so I'm like, where is God actually? Like, is he actually here? Is there actually, where, because that's what they were asking. They were like, you guys have all your tomes and your theological books and everything like that. Where is he? Why when you go to debates doesn't God show up? That's the type of stuff they were saying. So I decided, well, hang it all. I can't honestly go into a group of people and say Christianity's true. So I'm going to become an atheist. And before I did, I said a final prayer. I had gone through YouTube. I had looked for any evidence of any supernatural stuff that wasn't just in people's heads. Keep in mind, every supernatural experience that had happened up until this point could have been just in my head. I had no external evidence. And I concluded, okay, well, this probably isn't real, but I thought maybe there's still a possibility. So I said this prayer. And I basically said that I wanted a sign if there was anything out there that was non-human that was interacting with us. And I want this to happen. Basically, I want scientific evidence that there's something supernatural. So I needed something that occurred more than once. I needed another witness present. And I needed something for which I could find no natural explanation. Like, absolutely no way that I could even invent a natural explanation for this. If you've ever interacted with atheists, this is what they'll often do. You'll bring up something supernatural that happens, and they'll instantly respond with a natural explanation for that thing that occurred. It doesn't matter what it is. And that's what I was looking for here. So, I'm like, I'm an atheist now. Great. I need to reform my life, get back to all the sinning I missed out on, go to parties, hang out with people. On the left there, a bunch of friends from Chicago. I was an atheist for about 10 years. I went to University of Illinois, got my computer science degree. Those are a bunch of friends I made through those connections, work and school on the left. On the right was a trip I took to Sweden 6 years ago, something like that, and I ended up in Denmark. And that was a group, I think it was in Aarhus, Denmark. By the way, if you ever want to see the most epic New Year's celebration in the world, Aarhus, Denmark, actually. That year that I was there, they had so many fireworks. They give like an 8-hour period where you can do whatever fireworks you want, basically, over the city. And it is absolutely crazy. So that was really fun. All right, so while I'm an atheist, I'm getting these messages from Christians on Facebook and stuff like that. I'm getting all these Christians that are like trying to like explain to me why, like they would never ask me, they almost never asked me questions. Now, here in Wichita, both Steve and Deb were an exception to this. And I've told everybody this all the time because you would actually sit down with me and be like, oh, well, like you told me that one time, you're like, well, Josh isn't the type of person to like just make a crazy decision. He probably thought this through a lot, which is true. And I had all these people giving these crazy disjointed things to me, like trying to dismiss me, trying to engage me in debates, trying to like all sorts of stuff just because I had a Facebook with like 400 friends, and they were all from the Christian community. And when I announced I was an atheist, I might as well have just lit a fuse and thrown a grenade into the church. And so these are the type of stuff people would say. You just want to go out and sin, you have some secret sins that you never told anybody about. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I already told you the stuff that I have done. Like, I'm not hiding anything here. Why don't you read this book? Like, here's a special book. Have you heard of Lee Strobel? Yes, I've heard of Lee Strobel. What about, Josh McDowell? Josh McDowell, you heard Josh McDowell? Yeah, he spoke at Moody Bible Institute. Like, it's not like I wasn't exposed to this stuff, and I'd already read the Bible a dozen times, literally, from cover to cover. Like, I read Genesis 50 plus times because we had to read it like 10 times just for our Genesis class at Moody. It wasn't for lack of access to information. And then people would just not want to engage, and I was so confused. Because it was like, what is going on here? Is this what atheists have been experiencing all this time? Where are people? Also, there was a test I was doing. I don't even know if I've told you this. I knew, because I said that prayer, there was still a small part of me that might believe. I was looking for evidence of the Holy Spirit existing. I wanted to have two Christians who were separated from each other, or one Christian come up and tell me something about myself or something that was obviously supernatural. And everybody just wanted to debate. I'm like, all you would have to do is tell me about this dream I had when I was 15, and voila, I would instantly know that there's some supernatural connection with you. And so I just was like, well, the Holy Spirit must not exist, because, so I'm giving you all this information to kind of help you think through when people who aren't Christians or who've left the church or whatever, kind of the type of stuff that's going through their head. All right, so I decided actually around 2016, I got kind of sick of the U.S., and obviously the politics were a mess at that point in time too, and I was like, Bernie kept talking about Sweden. He kept bringing up Sweden all the time. I don't know if you remember this, and I was like, because he was like, we need to make our country like the government in Sweden. And at that point in time, Forbes would give these like lists of the happiest countries in the world, and Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Finland were always at the top. And I was like, you know what? I got all these liberal friends that are talking, threatening to leave the country. I'm actually going to do it. So I did. And I left early 2017, right after Trump got elected. And I'm like traveling around Europe. We're going to, that's Spain on the left, and on the right is in, I believe that was in London. And making all these friends and dating random people, which I regret now. And just having like this glorious time of what I thought. Here's some other examples up on the right there. That was one of the companies I worked at. That's actually the company I control that was doing like Plan Grid for the construction software. Lower right was one of our apartments, and we had a party there in Stockholm. Everybody dresses up for every single party in Stockholm for some reason. That's actually an old church on the left there. It's not really a churchy church anymore. It's more like just a fun place to go. But all right, 2017. I thought I'd escaped all of this religious crap. I thought I'd gotten away from all the politics. I'm in like this heaven. I'm in this utopia of this like atheist utopia of Sweden, right? And I got invited to go to London by my friend Hannah. And it was Hannah and her friend, I can't remember his name. And her friend was like, Josh, I have a penthouse you can stay at. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to stay at this penthouse. That sounds fun. The day before I was going to go, he messages me and says, oh, Josh, I forgot you were coming. I'm actually not even there. I'm like, I already bought my tickets and everything. Like, what is this? And my friend Maria, she's a Catholic girl. She's the first woman I met in Sweden. She says, Josh, why don't you just pack your bag and just go? Like, just go. Don't worry about it. I don't know if we can move that thing off the screen.
I'm doing
Is it
a
like-
computer problem.
Oh, there it is. Okay. She's like, why don't you just go? You're going to figure it out. So I arrive on the 26th. Now, you remember the date this is 20 years later. I'd forgotten about what date it was that this guy had turned around and looked at me. And I have hunches as we go through this that I may have had some sort of a curse or something put on me. Because this was too precise. Exactly 20 years. I mean, come on. So the 26th, I was going to arrive in London. I had no place to stay. I get a hold of Hannah. She's like, oh, my friend, yeah, he's really just kind of out there. He does stuff like this all the time. You can stay at my place. So I stayed at Hannah's place on the 26th. The night of the 27th, I was like, hey, I can stay at this other Airbnb. It's fine. I know you're busy this weekend, which she was. She was starting her new business on the 1st of November or the 31st of October. I don't remember. And the reason these days matter, it'll make sense in a second. So I go on Airbnb on the 27th. So the morning of the 28th, the blue one there, the first blue one, I'm in the bathroom. This was an old place in London that had been built in like the late 1600s, early 1700s. Giant cinder block walls. It had so much history. And the woman who owned it said all of her kids had moved out, and so she was renting out rooms. The place was so old it only had one bathroom on the ground floor. So she tells me, Josh, there's only one bathroom. Just be careful, people may need to come in and out. Oh, and by the way, there's a guy sitting here named Rodney Rascona. And he's actually doing this video for women in tech in Africa. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm in tech. Like, this is cool. Don't interrupt him. Don't bring any friends back for a party. He's got to present this video before President Trump and Melania here in a few months because of aid for African stuff. And I was like, whoa, this guy's a big shot. So I shake his hand, we say hello or whatever, I go to bed, that was the 27th, 28th in the morning, I get up, I go to the bathroom, and I'm in the bathroom, and I hear the owner come by the door, and I didn't hear her walk, but I hear, "Excuse me, sir." And I thought, oh, somebody wants in the bathroom, there's only one bathroom. I'm like, "Yeah, what do you need?" And there's no response. Just silence. I'm like, "Hello?" Nothing. I was like, what in the world is going on? So I finished my shower. That night of the 28th would have been Saturday, and Hannah had invited me to a Halloween party in London. So I went with her to the Halloween party. We stayed up till probably 3 a.m., and then she's like, "You can crash at my place." So I go back to Hannah's place on the 28th, crash at her place, and then on the 29th, she's like, "Josh, I've been partying all weekend." Actually, the 30th was the Monday when she's starting her business. And she's like, "I've been partying all weekend. I'm supposed to start my business tomorrow, and I haven't finished a ton of work. Can you please go back to that Airbnb?" I'm like really annoyed at her. I'm like, "Wait, what? Like, I can get out of your way." She's like, no, you need to go back to this Airbnb. And I'm like, why in the world do I need it? I was like, okay, fine. So I booked the Airbnb, same room. Next morning, I'm getting up, and that was the day I was going to interview for Spotify. So I got the Spotify logo up there. This was my dream job, okay? I had escaped the religion stuff. I had escaped the politics in the US. I don't know if you guys remember, but Spotify was actually the place when Obama was asked where he wanted to work after his presidency. He said he wanted to work at Spotify. There's actually a picture hanging in their hall in Sweden of the head of HR at Spotify with Obama. To give you an idea of so I'm in this liberal sort of atheist utopia. I'm like, oh man, I want everybody in Sweden wanted to work at Spotify. This was the coolest job in the entire country, okay? And I'm having my interview that morning. I'm in the bathroom, taking my shower, getting ready to go to this interview, and guess what happens? "Excuse me, sir." And I'm like, what in the world? Again? Twice in a row, somebody wants to get in the bathroom on 2 separate days? What? Hello? And I was like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, oh, you know what? I wonder if the shower water is so loud that whoever's outside can't hear me. So I turned off the shower water and I yelled hello. I was like, somebody is going to hear this. No response. I'm like, this is too weird. I turn on the shower water, I finish the shower, and I open the door to step out. And actually, it would have been right on my right, about where you're sitting. Rodney was sitting right there. So on you can actually see, I'm gonna walk over here. So this was where I was in the shower. It's a top-down view right here. I was in the shower. I heard there was a door there, and Rodney was sitting there at his computer. There was literally only maybe 8 or 9 feet between us. And he looks up and he goes, "Josh, who are you talking to in there?" And I'm like, well, the owner came by and wanted in. And he goes, "Josh, we're the only 2 people in the house right now." And I go, "Oh, well, you must be mistaken. You must have been got up or something." He said, "Josh, I've been sitting here the entire time you were in the shower." And I said, no. He goes, "Josh, I'm telling you, I've been sitting here this whole time and I heard it too." And I was like, "You heard what?" He said, "I heard a whooshing sound, like an utterance." That was the word he used, an utterance. Like something was saying something, but I couldn't hear the words. And I was like, where did you hear that? He said, head height in front of the bathroom door. I was like, right there? He said, yeah. So it was head height right where I heard it from. He heard this too, and he was sitting right there. And he said he looked up, and there was nothing there. So he thought, that's strange, and he went back to his video editing, and then he heard me talk to it. And that was so he was already freaking out. I wasn't. I was still convinced somebody must have come in or something like that, right? And he's like, and then he goes, "Josh, are you religious?" And I was like, oh my God. I got all the way to Europe to escape these nuts. Why is he bringing this up right now? And I said, oh, I used to be a Christian, but now I'm an atheist. He goes, oh, that's what it is. And I'm like, what is up with this guy? Why is he, this doesn't make any sense. What is he talking about? And I was like, you know what? I've been studying atheism now for 10 years. I've been studying all this stuff. I can prove him wrong. So I spent a good 45 minutes trying to recreate this sound. I did everything I could possibly think of. That's why I have a diagram of everything that was going on, because I tried to see if there was any possibility a sound came through the wall. Nope, the sound definitely came in front of the door. I looked for speakers. I looked for pipes. I looked for any way that there could have been an air differential. I even went into the shower. The shower had one of those settings where you set the temperature and then you turn it on. So the temperature was still set to the exact same temperature. I'm like, I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to close the shower curtain. I'm going to close the door, and I'm going to step out. I'm going to let it run and see if there's some weird steam thing that happens or something. Nothing. Well, this whole time, Rodney is convinced. He's absolutely convinced that something supernatural happened. But he's not afraid, he says. He just wonders if there was some sort of communication or something going on. He's telling me he's an Episcopalian Christian. It's like Catholic light is what he said, which I thought was kind of funny. And he's trying to preach to me a little bit, telling me about his ministry or his stuff that he's doing. And he's absolutely convinced. And while we're standing there, sure enough, the owner comes back, groceries in her hand. She walks in the door, and then she sees me talking to the guy. She told me not to interrupt. She told me not to interrupt him. He's supposed to be working on the video. And she's like, hi, what's going on? And I'm like, well, I don't know, like, what happened, because I was in the shower, and I thought for sure I heard you come by the door, and you weren't here. And Rodney and I have been trying to figure out where this came from. She goes, oh, Josh, that's, that type of stuff happens all the time. This place is haunted. And I blanked. There was no way I could have possibly known. I went back and looked at the Airbnb thing. There was no way I could have subconsciously gotten information that this place was haunted at all, from anywhere. And then she says, Josh, a lot of people have seen a woman who doesn't live here, and they ask me about her. And I'm like, no, she doesn't live here. But nobody's ever heard a voice. Well, now I'm even more freaked out. I'm like, well, why am I being singled out in some way by this? Now, at this point in time, I had not fully connected together that this was an answer to that prayer I prayed. It happened on 2 separate days, right? There wasn't a witness present, Rodney. Rodney's trying to scream stuff about Christianity, which I didn't want to hear. And I had asked that I would not be able to invent a natural explanation. I spent 45 minutes trying to invent a natural explanation for this and nothing. But I was sitting there thinking, have you guys seen Monty Python? Yes. Where the one, he comes up and says, well, the lady of the lake, chose me. And then somebody's like, look, strange women lying in ponds, distributing swords by moonlight is no basis of government, right? Like, that was where I was at. I was like, strange, ghostly apparitions, speaking voices in apartments is no basis for religion. I didn't know where to go with this. I had no barometer other than Rodney kind of hinting that maybe Christianity had something to do with this. So I was like, you know what? I can't figure this out. I am just going to forget it. I'd be like, this did not happen, right? So I'm hanging out, in Sweden with my friends. We went to Ibiza there. That's Ibiza in the center picture. I'm like trying to get connected to my chi or whatever, and trying to figure out. I could tell stuff was starting to. I had problems in my life, so there was the Instagram presentation, and then there was the not so good things that were actually going on in the background, and things were getting kind of darker and darker. It was like everything had been good for a while, and then it was like, nope. As you see people on Instagram, they post the beautiful pictures, and then you talk to them in private, and you find out they're actually suicidal. Similar type of thing. I'm giving off this presentation, and all of 2018, things were kind of getting darker and darker. I was doing all this fun stuff, hanging out with my friends from Spotify. We went to Chernobyl, doing all this traveling all over Europe. And then around the end of 2018, I'm having this darkness start to return. Come to find out, I didn't know this. This was around the time you, Steve, decided to get a group of friends together to start praying for me. I had no idea this was actually happening at this point in time. And then things got really, really weird. So I'm having I felt like I was moving through sludge. I felt like everything in my life, every decision I made was not quite, how's the battery? Oh, that's not bad. Okay, so I felt like everything I was doing I felt like there was an invisible, and it sounds hilarious now. I'm an atheist, but I felt like there was an invisible force that was holding me back from success. Everything I was doing, I was in the perfect spot. I had stuff lined up. I'm dating these beautiful women in Europe, and I'm working at Spotify, which is really cool to talk about. And I was in the most liberal country, so everybody's like, oh, I wish I lived in Sweden among all my friends and everything. So I had all that stuff together, but it's just like this force was pressing against me, and things were getting darker, and I was getting more depressed. Actually, before I go to that, so there was one night around this point where this would have been about maybe January of 2019. And I had a situation occur with paperwork at Spotify where I might end up owing the government here like 80 or 90 grand. You don't make very much in Sweden. You make about half your salary you do here. There was a mix-up in the paperwork and their options where I was going to have to pay the taxes on the options as if they were stock, which meant that I was going to have to it was crazy amount of money. And I had to get this paperwork done in like a really rapid period of time before New York offices closed at 4 a.m. So I was laying in bed. Also, this woman had just rejected me that I was interested in. And I was like in this really dark spot, and I was so mad at the universe or whatever. And I was so mad at somebody, I didn't know who to be mad at. And I'm laying there in bed, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. It was my decision to move to Sweden. It was my decision to work at Spotify. Yeah, this girl had rejected me, but I literally had just rejected another girl in order to get with this one. So I can't really be mad at her when I'm doing the exact same thing. All of my relationships that I'm having, these issues I'm having, well, I'm kind of doing the same stuff to people. Why am I'm making all of these decisions? I wanted to run my life, and then I made all of these decisions, and now I'm here. The only person I can really be mad at is myself. And then I was sitting there thinking about it because I couldn't go to sleep because I was waiting till 4 a.m. when this paperwork would go through. And I was like, you know what? I remembered the voice in the apartment. I was like, maybe there is something out there. Maybe there's at least one being that actually is kind of watching us and cares. And I was sitting in bed, and something important to note this is that this had been 10 years that I had never had that dark presence. I had never felt it. Not once. When I became an atheist, all of that stuff stopped. So I thought I'd fix the problem. Well, I'm sitting there in bed, and I'm thinking, man, this isn't working out. I need a change. Maybe something exists. So I reversed my prayer that I had prayed 10 years before, and I said, God, angels, aliens, I don't know what's out there. I don't know who's out there or what's going on, but I am tired of living my life for myself. And that exact same moment, for the first time in 10 years, I felt that dark presence come back and fill the room. And it was worse than I had ever felt it before. Like it wanted to kill me. This was not I legitimately thought I might die because it was so overwhelming. All of my hair stood up on end again. I was like, whoa, like what in the world did I do? My head is like going back to Christian concepts, but I had spent so many years sort of throwing all of them to the side that I basically was like, okay, I don't even know where to start here. So I prayed to God and I said, God, I don't know what this thing is that's mad at me, but can I please be protected? And I heard a little voice say, I will protect you. And it didn't go away. I tried to go to sleep. It kind of subsided a little bit. And at this period, this was happening every single day now. I would come home from work and I would walk up to my door and I could feel it a good 30 feet away. Like it was waiting for me to get done with work so it could harass me all evening. And I was like, what is going on? I thought I was losing my mind. I decided to sit down with my buddy Jacob. So Jacob's the one in the middle there on the lower left. And he actually, the house that I showed you at the beginning in Perry, he actually grew up a block away from me. And he decided to move to Sweden fortuitously, literally within like 2 weeks of me, and we hadn't planned it together. So he was actually one of my friends in Sweden when I was over there. This was crazy. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go hang out with Jacob, and I'm going to tell him the story about this voice in this apartment. I'm not telling anybody about this dark presence yet, because I thought they might just be like, all right, you need to go take pills. So I was like, Jacob, let's sit down. So we go to this park. This is a famous park in Stockholm on the upper left called Rollesholmsgården, something like that. Anyway, people don't even like saying the name there, so they call it Rollis. And we were sitting roughly right here in the grass. I believe it was right on this edge. And I was telling him the story about this voice in the apartment. And he looks at me like I'm nuts. And I go, well, do you have any ideas of what it could be? And he goes, maybe Rodney played a prank on you. And I was like, that seems really like far-fetched. He had no idea I was going to be there the second day. That's like a weird prank to play. I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to Rodney. So I had messaged him on LinkedIn, and we were going to meet the next week and talk about this. While we're laying there in the grass, and this is where it gets really weird. We can talk about this afterwards. This is so crazy. Just, I lay back my head in the grass, and I'm looking up in the sky, and I see a tiny little silver dish-shaped object flying extremely high through the atmosphere. And I'm like, Jacob, what is that? So I point up, and Jacob looks at it, and I'm like, look, there's two of them. Yeah, there were two little objects, like silver objects, flying extremely high speed. They were not leaving a contrail. All of the other airplanes were leaving a contrail. That's one of them on the right. And I was like, oh no, not UFOs, not that. I mean, this is already weird enough. Why in the world am I having this happen? But now, again, I have a witness. It wasn't just me who saw this. So I'm like, okay, So they fly out of sight. We're discussing, it's some top secret program, not really thinking it through that we're in Sweden, not the US. And then I'm like scanning the sky, looking for more stuff or whatever, and then I see that picture. I took that picture. I did not get a picture of the two craft, but I got this picture. So that's what the sky looked like. And you guys see anything interesting about that photo?
Looks like it's following a path.
Yeah.
Looks like it's what?
Following a path?
There's a darker
Yeah.
video.
It's a shadow or something.
Yeah. So I saw that. I see this line. I'm like, Jacob, look at this as well. This is like 2 to 5 minutes after this other thing happens. And he goes, oh, that's weird. Sure enough, this line followed all the way through the sky out of sight. And then I heard a little voice say, your life is going to be like this. And I'm like, what is going on? And I watched the plane fly through this. Okay, that is a natural phenomenon. What was not natural about it was that I got this exact picture of it. Okay, this is what's called a contrail shadow. It occurs, here's all the things you have to have in place in order to create a contrail shadow. The plane has to be above a layer of air that has enough moisture that it can't create clouds, but more than enough moisture to create a shadow. And then the sky has to be conducive to creating a contrail. The sun has to be in the right spot so the sun's light can reach it. And then in order to get this shot, which is extremely rare, you have to be at the exact right spot on the ground. Because that shadow is below the plane by maybe a couple miles, which meant that if you're off, the shadow is not in line with the plane. And so the fact that they were completely lined up meant that I was in that exact right spot on the ground, and I would not have gotten this photo if I did not see those two little silver craft fly through the sky. Because I wouldn't have been looking. The only reason I kept looking at the sky was because I saw them at that one moment. So I happened to look at the exact right spot, and I was like, what is going on? There's a word called synchronicity, which we can discuss a little later. This is a synchronous moment where a bunch of things are lining up, and you're not quite sure why, but it has significance to you. I decide I need to talk to Rodney. Rodney's there on the lower left. To give you an idea, this guy's actually pretty professional. He's been well known throughout the world. He actually, for those of you who are interested, during my discussion with him, he let me know that he actually led, Gore-Tex? The owner's, the inventor's wife, he led to Christ right before she died. Because he was doing videography, like shoots for Gore-Tex. So he's done a lot of traveling around the world. He's helped out in Haiti during some of the crises that are happening there. He went to Africa all the time. This guy was legit, okay? I decide I'm going to chat with Rodney. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to remind him. I'm not going to refresh his memory about what happened a year before in that apartment. I want him to tell me what he remembers. I was hoping he was going to tell me either it was a prank he played with the voice or that he remembered something completely different. Because those would be great. If it was a prank, I could dismiss all of this and be like, my head's I'm messed up. And if he said, oh, Josh, I remember it completely differently, I could take a pill and fix the whole problem. That was where my head was at. The last thing I wanted him to say was what he said. He says, Josh, I have thought about that event for this entire last year, and I even went to the owner of the apartment to find out about other stuff that had happened in the apartment. And it has been bothering me this entire time. And then he says, Josh, I've thought about it a lot, and I have come to the conclusion, do you know what a word of knowledge is? And I was like, no, I don't know what a word of knowledge is. He's like, oh, well, it's a thing that Pentecostals are into or whatever, but it's the idea that somebody's given a very special message that's just for them, like a spiritual message, and only they understand it. He goes, I have become convinced that day in the apartment, a special message was given to you that was only for you, and I was supposed to be the witness. I didn't tell him about my prayer. He had no idea. So I'm sitting there like, how did he know that he was supposed to be the witness? Like, this is crazy. We discuss it for a while, and he tells me, you need to read a book. It's a book about a Catholic saint from the 1940s. And I was like, oh, not Catholicism too. Like, what is going on here? He's like, you need to read this particular book. So it's a book. I don't know if you know, that's Padre Pio on the right. And Padre Pio was well known for having a significant amount of miracles and supernatural things that occurred around him. And, okay, before I get to the book, I threw this in right at the last minute here. When I got off the phone with Rodney that night, the dark presence filled the room again. Okay? But this time, something different happened. I felt two angels enter the room. They were taller than the ceiling and went down below the floor. I couldn't see them with my physical eyes, but I knew they were there, and I could feel their presence. It was the most terrifying. I mean, I was already terrified of this one being that hated me. Now I was terrified for a different reason. I knew these beings completely knew me inside and out. They knew every bad thing about me. And now I was terrified because I felt like a puppy when you come home and it has its tail between its legs because it did something wrong. Right? Yeah, that's exactly. I felt like the tiniest little ant. And I remember kind of thinking, man, if anybody knew how devastatingly exposing this is to have beings that know everything about you, they would never want. I mean, you're just like, okay, I'm going to do exactly what you say. They went to either end of my apartment. One stood on my balcony and one stood in front of my front door. And I heard a little voice say, you need this protection. And I'm like, what? Like, why do I need this? Like, what is going on? What did I get mixed up in here? I have no idea. This is crazy. So these two beings, I could feel their presence now repeatedly over the following weeks. I decided to read the book. At this point, all the spiritual battle came back. I could feel this darkness hovering over my soul, over my head. I would feel sick some days, like physically ill, because I could feel something pressing down on me. Surprisingly, every time I needed to do work or normal day-to-day stuff, that let up. This was really strange. It was only when I had free time that I would feel this like incredible oppressive force. I'm reading the book. Beginning of the book has all this cool stuff about Padre Pio's miracles. Surprisingly, that actually didn't do much for me at this point in time until I hit the end of the book and I came across this quote.
Oh, wow.
And I started bawling my eyes out. Because that whole dark period in my teens. Now, it was now connected. And it was like, this was like the plane. It was like, oh yeah, you had all that dark stuff happen. But this is all now connected together. And not only that, but I thought it through and I was like, oh wait, like, God knew I was going to become an atheist. He knew I was going to go to Sweden. He knew I was going to end up in London. He knew all this stuff ahead of time. I was making decisions. I was legitimately making decisions in my life. And it was like he just, okay, I know exactly where this guy's going to end up. And I'm going to prepare this whole thing. So I'm going to drop in a little dream. And now it's all going to connect together. Well, I'm both relieved to know that God had this all planned. By the way, do we need to take any bathroom breaks or anything like that? Do we need to are we still good? I've got about 15 minutes left, I think, or 10 minutes maybe. Actually, it might just be 10. I'm like, okay, I've got Catholicism. I don't know what this UFO thing I saw was. I've got this weird phenomenon in the sky that's apparently very rare. I've got this voice in this apartment. What in the world is going on? Like, I was kind of hoping God would have just given me oh, hey, here's some golden tablets from the sky, and you need to go to this church, and everything's going to be great, right? Like, this is actually, it was breaking my mind. I was actually having my mind broken because I couldn't piece this stuff together. And I was so proud of my intellect and the fact that I was a software engineer working at Spotify and all this stuff, and I couldn't put this together. And I had to be entirely dependent upon God and his angels to get me out of whatever mess I was in that I didn't even understand. It was completely humiliating. Well, I decide I'm still hanging out with my friends. I'm still trying to pretend like this stuff isn't really happening while it's happening. And one night I get back and I went out to smoke a cigarette on my balcony after having some beers. And I look up in the sky, and in Sweden in the summer, this would have been the summer of 2019, the sun doesn't go completely down, right? And so I'm like looking up at the sky, and I'm like, wow, that's a really bright star. And I'm like looking at it, it's like moving. It's like gently moving. And I look at it, and it just disappears in front of my eyes. And I was like, what in the world? Like that. So I like stared at the sky, and I was like waiting. I was like, maybe like an airplane had a glint of the sun off of it, or maybe it was a meteor. But it wasn't a meteor because, it wasn't a star because it wasn't flickering. It was a very fixed point of light that was extremely bright. Probably, if you've seen Venus, Venus is pretty bright. It was probably 5 to 10 times brighter than that. Just kind of drifting through the sky and disappeared when I looked at it. Crazy thing was, over the next 6 months, this darkness that was harassing me, every time it got extremely bad and I was starting to lose hope, I would see this star thing again. And I would look at it and it would disappear. And I began to think, oh, well, this must be something angelic. Like, there must be something angelic about this because it seems to be indicating to me, yes, Josh, we know what you're going through, we're watching you, and we're just giving you this as a small reassurance. Well, I didn't know what to do with it. But I started dating this girl, Sophia. And this was a journal entry. This journal entry is important for the story. I went out with her one night. We'd broken things off, and she still wanted to go out and grab beers, so I did, and she was chatting with me. And she starts unloading on me, and she's telling me I have this dark hole in my chest. And I feel like I should be at home, like just cuddling with my cat, but I feel like I have to go out and dance with strange men. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like demonic. Like hole in your chest, stuff like that. She's also taking a bunch of antidepressants that were prescribed by her doctor while simultaneously drinking. Like all this stuff was like adding up. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like going home that night. And I was like, God, angels, I don't know what I'm supposed to do about this. I want to know how to pray for my friend, Sophia. And I will never forget, I was walking along toward Electrowagen, my apartment there, and I heard the voice scream into my head the word deliverance. It was just the word deliverance. That was what I was supposed to pray for. So I started praying for deliverance. And this was the journal entry I made at that point in time. All right, I had prayed, or I had been thinking one day, okay, this star thing in the sky could just be whatever. How am I going to know it's actually from God? How do I know this is real? How do I know I'm not just imagining things in my head? So I had thought in my head, oh, well, if it moves in a crazy way, I'll know that it's actually not just a satellite or something. That next day I go out and I look up, oh, there it is again. I'm like, this has happened before. It disappears. And I look back and it reappeared again. I'm like, oh, well, that's never happened. Did it twice. And it disappeared. I was like, and then I look again and it reappears. And then it literally from about, that high in the sky, it accelerates from a standstill and accelerates past the horizon. Faster than I've ever seen anything move in my life. In about a second, it went from what would be, maybe 15, 20,000 feet over to disappearing out of sight from a standstill. And I'm like, how in the world did this thing know that I was thinking that? What is going on? Why am I having UFOs also? This is really crazy. What is happening? And I'm pacing my apartment one day, trying to think about it. I've been going through all these UFO websites to try and find anybody in history that had a story like this. And I'm like looking through all these historical stories of UFOs. I'm like, has anybody had one like reappear and like appear and stuff like that? Keep in mind, at this point in time, I have no evidence this is a metallic saucer-shaped craft. All I know is it's an unidentified flying object. I am not saying this is a whatever. And I'm pacing my apartment, and I'm like, oh, no. I probably had some swear words in there, too. But I was like, I do know a story. Everybody knows a story like this. Everybody knows this. Everybody puts it on top of their Christmas tree every year. So I went back and I read Matthew 2. And I noticed some things about the story. So I'll pause here for a moment so that you can read this. So you've probably heard scholars who are like trying to figure out, okay, was there an alignment of stars in the sky at that point in time where like made it really bright or something? Look, if you look in the Greek, it says it moved, it rose, it stopped. Not only that, but it says in verse 10, they had already seen the star. And then it says, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And I realized, oh, yeah, you know why they got overjoyed? Because it disappeared for a while and then came back. So you've got disappearing, reappearing, moving ahead of them, and then it stops over where Jesus was born. I'm like, whoa, okay, this is changing the story quite a bit. And now I'm having this happen. And I can't find a single story in history other than this one of something like this happening. And in this story, the star is guiding directly where Jesus was born. I was still not fully ready to accept the story of Jesus. I was still hoping this was some sort of new age mystical experience I was having, and that I would just be a yogi or something like that. But so I'm like, okay, all right, angels. Okay, I don't know what you're doing. If you want me to follow this the way the Magi did, I want you to do it again. So that next night I go out on the balcony, or that night, I don't remember. And I'm looking around. I don't see it. And then right at the exact instant that I gave up looking, that exact split second, I saw it dart out of the sky. And I knew exactly where it went because there was a crane that was building a building. Ironically, it was actually building the next building I moved into. And it shot right in front of the tip of it. And I grabbed my phone and I opened Google Maps. There's the building I was living in at the time on the top left there. And there's a text message I had sent to my friend Yoni. Because I was, at this point in time, I was starting to open up to a few friends about what was going on. And surprisingly, the atheist friends were actually thought it was really cool. Basically, I'm looking on Google Maps, and I'm scrolling from Electrobaggen 34 at the bottom until I see, you'll notice everything's in Swedish, except for one thing, New Life up there. So I'm like scrolling, and I'm like, New Life? I'm like, oh, come on. I click it, it's a church. I'm like, no. And then I saw it was 5 stars, and I was like, okay, well, that's good. So I had a good rating. And I was like, all right, fine. I've only been getting single breadcrumbs this whole time, right? If you'll notice the story, every single time I'm only given one next thing, and I have to follow that next thing. So this was my next thing. So I decided I'm going to go. I show up at New Life, and there's a traveling pastor named Jim Reimer. The church was not very impressive from the outside. It was a Protestant church, leaning Baptist of some sort, and there was this traveling guy in the lower right there who was there. And he stands up and he goes, okay, well, first of all, they actually got up and they were like, hi, we want to know if there's any visitors here today. So you fill out this card and you can meet us afterwards and tell us what brought you to church today. And I was like, oh my goodness, nobody's going to believe this story. What am I going to do? Like, they're going to like, yeah, I followed like the star in the sky and I'm here. So Jim Reimer gets up, he's speaking, and he's talking about various things related to spiritual warfare. You can actually find that sermon was recorded. You can actually find it from that day. It's still online. I actually downloaded it. And then he goes, by the way, I'm actually going to be here the next 3 days, and I'm doing a special series on spiritual warfare. Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. And I was like, oh, man. Okay, fine. I need to go. So I show up on Monday, and he puts up his slides, and that was his first slide.
Wow.
And I almost fell out of my chair. And I remember thinking, no Christian is going to believe this story. I remember actually thinking that. I was like, I grew up in like, more of the just doctrinal stuff. Experiences aren't as important as like, making sure your doctrinal statements are all lined up and you sign on the dotted line and all the, Steve can tell you stories about my dad and the doctrinal statement kept being longer and longer and longer at that church. So this was crazy. And I was like, what am I going to do with all of this? And at that point, I was like, all right, God, I don't get what's going on, but I give my life back to you. Clearly, this is real. What am I going to do next? I'm just going to have to trust that you've got a plan for the next portion of my life. And the dark presence, all that evil stuff that was going on, I had the pastors come back from that church. We prayed over the apartment and everything. And since that day, roughly 4 years ago, I've been working on basically rededicating my life to the Lord and just telling people the story. And I've had a lot of crazy supernatural experiences since then, but nothing beat that particular 6 months. That was absolutely wild. And yeah, so that's the gist of that portion of the story.